This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
The 3 C's of rewilding, cores, corridors and carnivores, might just be happening under our eyes in the heart of Dunedin. But you don't need to run for the hills. In today's episode, we'll be talking about predatory beetles, ecological stepping stones, and how the George Street planters are adding to the beauty of our city and our well-being. Today's episode of Rewilding in Action is supported by Taste Nature, Dunedin's organic supermarket, cafe and holistic health hub located at 131 High Street. Founded on ethical and sustainable values and a holistic model of health and healing, Taste Nature stocks a large range of organic, non-GMO and chemical-free products, with freshly made nutritious food served in its popular cafe, and has an integrative health clinic. Check out their website at tastenature.co.nz for more information, as well as their online shopping service. Kia ora, ko Maureen Howard tōku ingoa. Welcome to Rewilding in Action. I'm Maureen Howard, the host of this podcast. One of the original foundations of rewilding is to provide corridors or stepping stones across built-up areas to help connect wildlife across the landscape to allow them to move between wilder areas. In this episode, my guest is University of Otago Ecology PhD student Jacqui Theis. Jacqui is in the finishing stages of writing up her PhD on the invertebrate populations that are colonising the large street-side planters that were installed in Dunedin between 2022 and 2025 along the city's main street. The planters range from 6 to 30 square metres and contain several mostly native vegetation layers such as trees, shrubs, ferns, grasses and creeping ground cover plants, as well as structural habitat such as large rocks, pebbles and bark. All this complexity provides food and shelter to sustain a wide variety of invertebrates. Jacqui and I meet by one of the street-side planters, and I ask her to describe where we are and what we're looking at.
So here we are on George Street. We are at the Edinburgh Way block. So this is actually the youngest block. The planters along George Street were constructed in 3 consecutive blocks. So the first block is Farmers Block. There are lots of native plants. The second block is Molds Block, so we have lots of flowering plants there. And the third block is a mix of both, mix of exotics and natives. And here we are at one of the youngest planters. As you can see, there's lots of bark as the ground medium.
Right.
And on the other side, we have lots of loose stone as the ground medium, so the council has mixed that up. And obviously the council has the goal to increase biodiversity, so that was one of their huge goals with that upgrade. So they paid really close attention to have plants from each height layer. So we have lots of ground covers, different species of ground covers, then plants that grow up to roughly 30 centimeters height. We have shrubs, as you can see, like hebe varieties between the 2 and 5 meters height category. And then, some of the trees will actually grow to above 5 meters.
Yes.
So it's fantastic.
And you've got these little creeping ground cover species too, which will be excellent for the bugs.
Yes, yeah. Insects loves ground covers. So if you think of your own backyard, if you think of upgrading your backyard, it's always good to include some ground covers. Bugs really love it because they can hide in it, and it's really complex.
Yes.
And the council actually had the goal to accommodate for different types of wildlife. So we have these large trees, which are really important for birds, for example. And then, of course, we have all the different plants for the insects. But rocks are really important, for example, for skinks. So you never know, they might come into the city centre one day.
It's part of our big vision.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so now your focus was on the beetles, because is that what you had studied earlier in your career?
Well, I have always been really fond of insects, and especially beetles. And one of my supervisors, Barbara Barrett, she's actually the beetle specialist in the area, so I'm very lucky to be mentored by her. I'm looking at general invertebrate communities in these planters with a special focus on beetles. So the beetles are identified to the species level, because then we can really get a good idea how healthy the planters are, what kind of insects or beetles are here compared to more natural areas. In New Zealand, beetles make up one of the largest groups of insects. And we have lots of different native species of beetles. There are lots of fungivores, lots of carnivores, herbivores. So it will give us a really good idea what kind of, beetles these planters attract and what other insects are here. Yeah.
And one of the things about that, I'm particularly interested in terms of rewilding is, although all of these plant species have been put here, none of the beetles were they?
Correct. So they may have very well hitchhiked, of course, right? So in terms of how insects disperse throughout an area, some of them would have come in with the soil. So I assume I found some mollusks, like some slugs. They would have likely come in with the soil. And spiders, they tend to hitchhike on us a little bit as well, on clothes. Of course, some insects may have been already in the plants that were put in. But yes, a lot of the time insects disperse through landscapes by flying, and there are lots of beetle species that actually fly. And of course, there are some that are also ground dwelling, so they only crawl. And we have found some of those as well, so it's exciting.
And so for those ones, do you think perhaps they came in with the soil?
I have not found that specific beetle species, Scopodes fossulatus. It's a native predator beetle. It only crawls to disperse. I haven't found it for a few sampling seasons, and then I found it. I found a wee community in this planter, actually, which is super exciting. So yes, it could very well have come in by itself. That's what animals do. They move through the landscape, and ultimately these planters are little islands in a grey landscape, so they're little refuges. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Have you managed to get any findings that you can share at this point, or is it all waiting to be published?
Oh no, I'm really happy to share. So what I've done is I compared the invertebrate communities that we find in these straw tree planters with other more natural sites in Dunedin. So I also included the university, because the condition is somewhat the same. There's lots of foot traffic. There's lots of concrete, right? But the plantings, they are much more established. They're about 11 years old. And then I also looked at the town belt, which, of course, is not too far away, basically around the corner. And, of course, there it's kind of a remnant forest fragment. So we will find different kind of insect communities in these different locations. What I have found is that, in fact, George Street has a lot of insects here that I didn't quite expect to find right away, which is really awesome. Yeah. So we find a lot of flies. Now, lots of people are often annoyed by flies, but actually they're really, really important pollinators, right? We found lots of different spider species, lots of beetles. However, in terms of beetles, the communities of beetles I find on George Street are very different from those at the university and at the town belt, which was really interesting. So at the town belt, I find a lot of ground-dwelling and predator beetles. And that makes sense, because at the town belt, we have a lot of leaf litter. There's lots of food resources for them. And we have a lot more structural diversity in terms of plants. But what I find along George Street is I find lots of beetles. They're called rove beetles. They fly to disperse. They're really tiny. So of those I find lots of different species, which is really exciting.
Yes. And I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Because they've arrived predominantly by flying in.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And over time, here you would expect that, yes, over time, it will become more and more diversified.
Yes, and in fact, I already found some differences between the three blocks. So there are significant differences between the three blocks, and we can assume that is because of the age of the planters and the plants. The more vegetation matures, the more likely we are to get, a greater variety of insect species with them.
Right. What was the time difference between each of the plantings?
I think it was roughly 5 months or 6 months difference between the first and the second block. And then I think roughly the same time again
Yeah.
between the second and
Another aspect of these planters is that they're providing stepping stones, little islands for species to kind of move through the city and get to perhaps other more core, wilder areas that surround the city.
Yes, so that was one of DCC's biggest goal, also to increase connectivity across Dunedin's landscape. Yeah. And the way to do that is by integrating these stepping stones. So if you imagine you're a bird or an insect and you fly above, the city, you need places to rest, places that are inviting, right? You need some greenery. And that's how we can increase connectivity.
Right, yes. Okay, well, let's have a little look in here. And because I'm really interested to know a little bit more about, how you collected your data and what kind of different species we might find in the different structural levels of the plants.
So this one here is Acina microphylla.
We're looking here at a very small ground plant. There's a few different species, aren't there?
Yes, there are a total of 3 different ground cover species just in this little spot here, which is really amazing. Lots of structural complexity. So ground covers are really great for insects. As you can see, there are lots of tiny leaves, so that in itself is already structure, right? But then there are so many little places they can hide in. Here's a little slug. Oftentimes insects don't really become active, before 10:30 a.m.
This is the flying ones.
Yeah. And then these plants here, they're really handy, so they are.
So we're looking at
Astelia
a bush
fragrance.
Yeah.
And so as you can see, they have kind of a V-shaped leaf. Yeah. So that's where they can often collect leaf litter. So that in itself can be a habitat. And whenever you're out in your garden or out in nature, have a look under the leaves. So the underside of the leaves. Often insects hang out there. Oh yeah, you see there's like a little...
Like an aphid.
It's a little fly.
Yeah.
A spider just crawling into the plant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, I always like to remind people that we have lots of flowering native plants as well, right? So planting your natives doesn't have to be boring or only green. There's lots of color to choose from as well. So Hebe varieties, for example, they have lots of white flowers. You can choose some with purple, beautiful flowers. So you can definitely beautify your space with natives, that's for sure.
Yes. Okay. And then we've got, if we move along here, and what looks like a totara, we'll have species that'll be on there too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There are quite a few studies about, bark on trees, how beneficial that is as well. The more complex anything is, the more beneficial.
More little cracks and crevices.
Yeah. And if you think of smaller plants, we just pointed out the flax. There are quite a few ferns planted in the planters as well. And just the leaf shape, of the ferns in itself, that's already quite complex. So insects really love ferns as well.
Right. So tell me a little bit then about how you collected your data. Yeah, we can do a visual inspection. Was that part of it?
Yes, for sure. And first of all, I looked at what kind of plants are planted, what kind of ground medium is used, and then I used 2 methods to collect insects. So the first method is pitfall trapping. So I installed, there's a honeybee visiting the flower, pollinating. Nice. So the first step is to install a cup with dishwashing liquid and water into the ground, level with the ground, so that when insects crawl along the planters, they fall in and unfortunately they drown. But that way I can take them with me into the lab and identify them. And if I find beetles, I can identify them to species, which is only doable with the microscope.
Yes.
Then I also used handheld vacuuming. So to find out what kind of insects live in which plant, I actually vacuumed the plants. Yes. And I was often asked by people why the DCC is using the taxpayers' money to clean plants. I promise you that was not it. I was seriously just looking at what kind of insects are hanging out in these plants. And I focused on Libertia species, so they are here.
Maybe in the Carex family? I'm not sure.
It is, yeah. And insects really like hanging out in it, especially at the bottom.
So you would put a pitfall trap close to there, or
the pitfall traps I randomly placed throughout the planter. I placed more pitfall traps in large planters than very small planters, of course, and then I vacuumed these plants here from the Carex family. I vacuumed the Astelia fragrans, the flax, ferns, and also Dianella nigra, which produces purple little berries. And of course, when these berries fall off eventually onto the ground, then again, that's a food source for herbivores, for example, right? So, yeah, they really thought about it really carefully, which plants to plant, which is really fantastic.
It is really fantastic. And the fact is, you got predatory invertebrates too, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes. And if they're there, presumably they're predating on other invertebrates.
That's correct.
That's a sign that you've actually got a community.
Yeah, you have a functioning ecosystem. The fact that they can sustain themselves, is really fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, it's exciting. And so you were looking at identifying, I guess, species groups or classes of species, and also abundance. Was that also part of your measures?
Yes, yeah. So I looked at how many insects do I find in these planters, which order do the insects belong to, or invertebrates belong to. For example, Diptera flies, Coleoptera beetles, then there's spiders, there's of course Lepidoptera, which includes moths and butterflies, and so on, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And then for beetles, I went into the exact species level. Yeah.
And one of the amazing things about our invertebrates that I did read was that close to 97% are endemic.
Yeah.
So found nowhere else, which is, we're
amazing.
so it is absolutely amazing that here in New Zealand we have so many endemic species and so important to protect them.
Absolutely.
And provide places for them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always like to hero our native insects, because when people think of insects, they often think of exotic species like the honeybee. But for example, there's so many native bees, there's so many native beetles. I really want to hero them.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway, it's something for us to be thinking about in our own gardens.
Yeah, absolutely. And for gardening especially, my other supervisor, Professor Yolanda van Heesek, she has created a tool called Garden Star together with Phil Seddon to evaluate the biodiversity value of your own backyards. And the number one thing you should really focus on is messy gardening techniques.
Yes.
Let the plants grow, let nature do its thing.
I'm very good at that.
Yeah, yes. So, invertebrates will absolutely thank you for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe not being too worried if you've got some weeds.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Ultimately, even weeds flower, right? Attracting pollinators, including native bees.
Yeah.
Of course, in very urban settings like George Street, if we would just let nature take its course, exotic species are really good at colonizing. So we do need to pay attention on planting the right thing and managing it properly. But in your own backyards, it's really important to really adopt these messy gardening practices. And I actually chatted to a gardener the other day, and she also told me, look, if you just let nature do its thing, it will attract insects, but also predatory ones. So that might be good for your vegetable growing by eating the aphids. And it's just...
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we're working with nature.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's walk along to the next planter or the next group of planters. Yeah. So we're just passing by some of the trees that you've pointed out to me have got a different kind of system in the roots. Tell me about that.
Yes, yeah. So these trees are not put into any of these planters. They're basically surrounded by concrete.
Yes.
But what they've done is they installed what is known as a strata-vault system. It's basically a honeycomb structure underground so that the roots of the trees can expand more freely. And that way they think, the trees can grow more healthily.
Yes.
And can expand more, which is great.
And also, it means that they're less likely for the root system to be forced upwards.
Correct.
And causing disruption of the pavement.
Yeah.
So it's benefit for us as well. So we're at the group of plantings that went in second. So, and we've got a few flowers here. These are exotics, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They are really beautiful, aren't they? The yellow flowers here. And here we have also the native plant that I told you about. You can see the purple berries. Beautiful.
Look
and
at
then we have
a beech, yes.
And some more exotic flowers down there, the white flowers. So it's a really, really beautifully designed planter we got here.
The other thing that I noticed is this is a smaller island.
Yes,
and that will have an impact too. Did you look at that?
Yes, I looked at it, but surprisingly, much to my surprise, it didn't come out as a significant predictor. So it didn't matter too much.
Right. All right.
So I suspect the fact that we are in an area where it's mostly concrete, and then there's something green that really attracts the insects to it. That's really the most important. Also, what I found is, and you will notice when we walk further, we do come across some planters with loose stone as the ground medium. And bark is certainly better to attract insects. It's a better habitat. They can hide in it much better. Loose stone it's a popular choice for landscaping, but it's not exactly most beneficial for biodiversity.
And I guess the bark does slowly break down as well, so it is providing some food for the herbivores.
Yeah, it decomposes naturally, that's right, yeah. And insects really like to hide under the different bark pieces as well.
Right, yes, there's more contours, and we were talking about that complexity.
Yes,
yeah, okay.
But I should just say, in terms of stone, loose stone, the pebbles are not really popular for insects. But what you can do is you can buy different types of rocks and create lizard habitat, for example, right? You can stack them and make it look really beautiful, actually, with some plantings around, and that will also be really nice for insects too.
Yes. I asked Jacqui about the biodiversity tool that she's created to assist developers and urban landscapers to provide for wildlife.
So I've created the New Zealand Biodiversity Factor, which is a suite of tools to assess the biodiversity value of urban developments. So it can be for residential subdivisions or transportways like, George Street Road, individual buildings or commercial spaces and industrial spaces. And I should just give a big shout out to the People, Cities and Nature initiative, which is supporting me with my PhD and that I'm part of. And the idea of the tool is that urban professionals like architects, urban designers, urban developers can use that tool with their plans. Yes. So they enter the data from their plans and then they receive a biodiversity score out of 100 to see how well they score on that biodiversity scale. And they then receive tailored recommendations on how to increase biodiversity in meaningful ways.
That's fantastic. And it's really diverse, in terms of all of the different categories. Yes. There's permeability to allow rain to get into the soil and lighting. Mm-hmm. It covers a whole range of aspects, doesn't
correct.
It? Yeah.
And perceived as the most important category was the vegetation category. Again, so having a look at what kind of vegetation is planted, how tall will it get, all the different height layers present.
Right. Yeah. Okay, let's quickly go down to the final one.
Yes.
Okay, we're at the earliest planting area.
Yeah. So here we see the most mature plants. And I mean, it's very obvious, isn't it? We're kind of standing right next to this beautiful tree. It has grown so huge since I first started collecting all my data. And here we can see the flax. You can see the leaf litter that's collecting in it.
Yes.
So that will be a little habitat in itself. And here we have some more ferns. So the first block is really the block with most ferns and with most native plants, really. And as you can see here, the ground cover is slowly making its way up. And what I think is really fantastic is that the DCC just lets the plants go a little wild, which I really, really love. It just looks so beautiful. And it's designed in a way that we all know it's meant to be that way, right? Yes. So you have these, from the planters, these concrete edges, so we know it is designed to look natural. And that's something you can easily do at home as well. Like if you think of berms, right, lawn, if you just kind of mow the very edge and then leave the middle to grow, it looks like it's meant to be that way.
Yes, so getting that intentionality. Yes. And I do it in my own berm. I've got a huge berm, so I love it.
Yeah, it's pretty, yeah.
And in terms of just looking at across the whole city, making sure that there is green space in these stepping stones to connect our city. Yeah.
And it's so important for all of us to connect with nature.
Yes.
There are so many studies out there that show if you have a connection to nature and you don't have to actively interact with it. You just need to walk through a space where there's greenery. It increases your life satisfaction. And it also increases your physical and mental well-being. If we spend time in biodiverse environments, and that's exactly what the council, has the goal to do, to create biodiverse environments in the city centre, that shows that the microbiomes in the soil and in the air are more diverse, and that in turn is really important for our physical well-being. So I always say to people, get outdoors and really enjoy that wildlife around us.
Thanks very much to my guest, Jacqui Theis. I'm so grateful to Jacqui for sharing her time and expertise, despite being in the final throes of writing up her PhD thesis. This episode shows how important it is to consciously build space for nature into our cities, and that it can be done in ways that are beautiful. It shows that if we can build it and design it well, the invertebrate wildlife will come. Thanks for listening to Rewilding in Action. I'm Maureen Howard. I'd be so grateful if you could share this podcast with a few of your mates. In my next episode, I facilitate an audience Q&A with Hugh Wilson from Hinawai Reserve and with Matt Phelps from NEP Rewilding. Until then, I will leave you with birdsong, recording details in the show notes of Tui, that's loved by my guest, Jacqui Theis, an urban rewilder who is letting nature take the lead.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.